So take a look on page 486 and 487. On page 486, you should be looking at the terms systole and diastole. You should think about the cardiac cycle. And then on page 487 at the bottom, it kind of gives you a visual of that squeeze of the ventricles that occurs. So up at the top of page 487, there's these three green squares: ventricular diastole, ventricular systole, ventricular diastole. Everybody with me? So there's a lot of information in that figure. What I would ask is that you kind of focus on the middle part. If you look on the left, the y-axis is labeled pressure in millimeters of mercury. Do you see that? Are you with me? So this, I think, is the most helpful part of this particular figure, especially the blue line. So what this does is it gives you an idea of the pressure inside of the left ventricle during a heartbeat. So diastole is the resting phase, and you'll see the pressure is very low. Then you have systole, where you can see that huge arch where the pressure goes way up as the ventricles are squeezing. And then diastole, they drop immediately back down again. So if you're with me on this visual then, the same thing happens as you make your way through arteries that are very close to the heart. So when we measure blood pressure, we're measuring blood pressure based on the brachial artery. Now in the brachial artery, it's close to the heart. I mean, picture this, right? The ventricle squeezes blood out, it goes up through, right? The left subclavian artery, for example, and then through the left axillary artery, and then down through you. So it's very close to the heart. Your brachial artery is going to be very close to the heart. So as blood makes its way through here, what's going to happen is you're going to have a little bit of pressure that is measured in our standard unit of measurement, which is mmHg, millimeters of mercury, same as is found on page 487. So there's a little bit of pressure that's pushed outward against the walls of the arteries from the inside. And then when there's a surge of blood that is squeezed from the ventricles, that kind of causes everything to bulge outward, and then it goes back to normal. So during the resting phases, there's always a little bit of pressure exerted outwards, but during systole, during those squeezes of the ventricles, you get this surge of blood that really presses a great deal of pressure, or a lot more pressure, against the walls. And it kind of causes this outward bulge, as you see here. So a little blood coming through, and then more blood coming through during the surge. So what blood pressure is an outward push against the walls of the artery from the inside out. Does anyone know numbers that would be typical of blood pressure reading?
120 over 80.
Good. So 120 over 80 is kind of our typical average blood pressure. So what that refers to is exactly these pressures. When you have a surge of blood coming through, the surge of blood pushing from the inside would be as much as 120 millimeters of mercury pressing outward from the inside. But when the heart is relaxed, when there isn't as much blood coming through, there's still pressure there. There has to be some pressure. And this is where you have 80 millimeters of mercury. So we call this then our systolic number, which pertains to systole of the ventricles. And we call this our diastole, which pertains to the diastolic number in the heart. So be careful with this one, because very standard test question is to give you something like this, 120 over 80. And I ask you on the test, well, can you tell me what this patient's diastolic number is? And a student will put down on the test, well, their diastolic number is 80. You have to remember the metric. A number by itself actually doesn't mean that much. So what it really means is 120 millimeters of mercury over 80 millimeters of mercury. Questions so far?